Hello everyone and welcome to Talent Talks. Today I am joined by Winnie Annan-Forsen from Barclays. I will let you introduce yourself, Winnie. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. My name is Winnie Annan-Forsen and I work at Barclays. I work within the diversity and inclusion team for Barclays UK. And my background spans across various HR and leadership roles. So I've had some time in learning and development, HR business partnering for operations and technology teams, and then also more recently being a leader in the retail banking network, looking after a team across multiple locations. So that's me.
Fantastic. What a career history with Barclays. It's amazing. So you're now, as you mentioned, in a D&I specialist role. How did you end up securing that opportunity within Barclays?
Yeah, sure. So I'm proud to work at Barclays because it's such a great opportunity. It's got great opportunities to be able to have quite a varied career like I have. We've got lots of great internal mobility kind of campaigns and opportunities that enable colleagues to be able to find different ways to move across and develop in their careers. And diversity and inclusion has always been a passion of mine. So I started my career, like I mentioned before, in learning and development. And that's just because I was passionate about seeing people succeed. And I think it's a very similar principle in diversity and inclusion. I mentioned quite a lot to people because you'll notice I'm Black, I'm mixed race. So I grew up in Ghana, West Africa. And, coming to England at the age of 15, it was really difficult trying to fit in. And I know that it's even more difficult for someone who is full Black, like my mother is, compared to me, who's mixed. I'm quarter Dutch, but I don't identify with my Dutch heritage. And I think it's very difficult when you come from a whole different place and try to fit into a new culture. And I'm mindful of my own experience and how I can make sure that I can make other places and workspaces more comfortable for other people who may experience a similar challenge as well. So that's why I love working in D&I.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. When we talk about diversity and inclusion, what are we covering within that sort of banner?
So diversity and inclusion, as we all know, diversity is all about making, celebrating what makes us different, right? Yeah. And inclusion is more about making areas more inclusive. And it's almost, I heard a description today that said diversity is being invited to a party, and then inclusion is all about being asked to dance. And I think that's a really good way to describe it. For me, it's saying we're all different and we all look different, have different experiences at this table, but inclusion is saying we all deserve to be at this table. And unfortunately, not everybody has that experience. In terms of the key focus areas from a diversity and inclusion standpoint, most of us know about the gender agenda, and we do quite a lot of work as diversity professionals to look at what makes it more difficult from a kind of gender standpoint, limiting more so females, as we know, from being able to progress into more senior leadership positions, but looking at that talent pipeline from early on and creating male allyship. So, we talk about male privilege, and it's, privilege is not a negative thing. It's just identifying opportunities where people might be more advantaged and how they can use that advantage and privilege to open more doors for other people. The multicultural agenda, we know a lot has happened around, Black individuals because of the events that happened with George Floyd. But then we also don't like to use the term Black and ethnic minority, but we also need to look at other populations that may also be impacted by issues, especially from a systemic racism perspective. So we still know that we've got a lot more Black and ethnic minority professionals in lower level positions than we do in senior positions. So how do we make sure that we make our workspaces more equitable so that when they come in, they don't feel like they are less advantaged than other colleagues to be able to progress? We also look at the disability agenda, which covers physical and mental disabilities as well, and helps colleagues once again to be able to feel not just more included, but also have less obstacles to be able to thrive in the workplace. And I think mental health is such an important thing right now, especially especially with the COVID and the impact that's having. We know that, suicide rates are continuing to go up, and making sure that our body well-being is looked after is really important. And also our customers and their vulnerability is very important in the society and the communities around us. It also covers multi-generational. That could be potentially individuals from a military background, our older populations, especially once again with the COVID, they typically tend to be a significant part of our vulnerable kind of populations and how that impacts them, but also our younger generations. If we think about social mobility and the fact that work experience is a lot harder to do now, right? So how are they going to be able to have entry points into the workplace? And then once again, for groups that are maybe a little bit more socially disadvantaged, how is that further impacting them as well? And then the final one is the LGBTQ plus community. So once again, from a colleague standpoint, any issues that colleagues may have also at home that could impact them at work. We know that 24% of the homelessness population is actually made up of LGBTQ plus individuals, because of the impact of, some of their choices about their identity and how their families choose or choose not to accept it. So there are many things that form part of the diversity and inclusion agenda, but it spans beyond what just makes us different or what makes us feel included. It's also about making sure that the structural, mechanisms that we have around us also don't make people feel like they don't belong, or don't inhibit people from bringing their whole selves to work or in life in general as well.
Yeah, exactly. So what would you say is your biggest advice to some of our HR colleagues out there who are listening to this today and who are thinking, I want to specialise in diversity and inclusion? How do they go about that?
So I think for me, passion is very important. I don't think you can speak on behalf of individuals if you don't understand and empathize what they're going through. So having empathy for diverse colleagues and understanding, or diverse people, and understanding that their experience will be different from yours, but still being empathetic and passionate enough to be able to speak on their behalf is very important. But I also think to be a diversity professional, you have to be both strategic and colleague focused. So when I speak strategically, you need to be able to have a commercial mindset and be able to talk data, talk strategy. What is the business plan right now, and how do we need to be more strategic in the decisions that we're making that will impact the business on a wider scale? And we know that some people don't necessarily understand why D&I is important still. So being able to bring the numbers in and be able to talk about the commercial impact can sometimes be what helps you to be able to land messages effectively. But that colleague focus is so important. A lot of companies try and do one or the other. So they have really big bang initiatives, campaigns that, aim to address big issues, but then are still allowing microaggressions to take place. They're still allowing, no policies in place for racist behaviors or negative colleague behaviors. And I think that organic colleague piece also needs to be facilitated. It's important that there are colleague networks where people can feel like they have a safe space to speak up. There is allyship, and every single individual in the business needs to feel accountable for diversity and inclusion. It's so important.
So that sounds like almost a good place to start. If HR, as you know, diversity and inclusion from a topic perspective within the HR world has definitely, been catapulted to the front, and so people are maybe be given diversity and inclusion as part of their remit now, and thinking, right, where do I start? How do I start to make an impact? And that sounds like some quite good advice there already around creating allyship groups. And what else is there that you would recommend as a starting point?
So I think for organizations that don't have specific D&I teams, looking at existing infrastructure and how that fits. So for example, your performance process, that already exists. Have you thought about how maybe your process can overcome biases in individuals? How are your processes more diversity and inclusion oriented, and can make sure that they're not disadvantaging different groups over others because of bias? Your recruitment processes is very important. Start to look at your analytics, right? So how are you tracking your candidate pipeline, how they're identifying themselves? First of all, are there any disadvantages being caused by people identifying themselves in a particular way? And equally, for those who choose to identify themselves, which is a big hurdle in the first place, right? So it's amazing when people feel comfortable to, but are we then removing any blockers that might hinder their progression in that process? I think a lot of companies have the temptation to hire a D&I individual, which I think is important if you don't have the knowledge and the expertise. But I think it's more important to just actually look at your individual processes that already exist, because that's where the issue is. That's where the systemic racism exists. That's where the bias exists. And hiring somebody else to deal with an issue and not giving them access to those processes just feels like a waste of time. So that's very important.
That makes perfect sense. So yes, so start with your processes. Yes, that's brilliant. So how do you ensure diversity and inclusion is not just seen as a bit of a fad, because it has been sort of catapulted to the forefront recently, you know, and it's not a tick box exercise, and really ensure that you can embed it into your organization's culture?
Yeah, definitely. So I've already talked about embedding as part of your processes.
Yes.
Also taking accountability and measurement. I feel like when you're measuring stuff, a lot of people talk about whether or not there should be targets for D&I or not. And I do think it's a very interesting debate and a point to continue talking about. But for me, I think targets are what a lot of people do work to. And sometimes you do need some of those to make sure that people are held accountable for their responsibility as part of the work that we all have to do. In the D&I space. And then I think, you know, part of that accountability comes then with, you know, you're talking about it regularly. If it does start to feel like it's not being talked about enough, look at, once again, your existing meetings, your town halls, etc. I think there should be a D&I slant on every process, because, you know, it's the right thing to do. But once again, my view is, if it's done right, it shouldn't feel like an additional thing. It should be a consideration as part of everything that you do.
Yes. We talked about embedding and KPIs, you know, that, and I suppose the feeling it is how you sense the success of your diversity and inclusion initiatives, isn't it?
Yeah, I always say that, look around you. If you don't think there's an issue, speak to colleagues around you. Find out if they feel there is an issue, and then look at the data. Because the data should only be telling you what you see and don't see. If you look at the data and it's a surprise, then it means that you don't have an honest angle on your organization. So if you look around and you see that there are a lot of, you know, white middle-aged males around your leadership table, but then when you step out of that meeting room or virtual meeting room and you see lots of Black colleagues typing away at the desk doing the volume activity, you know there's an issue. And if you're not doing anything about it, you're choosing to ignore it. And that data is just a wake-up call. There are a lot of D&I issues, though, that aren't visible. So we talked about mental health issues. That's a lot harder to identify. We still have a lot of issues around legal implications as well, especially for companies that are global. In some countries, it's still illegal to be gay, which I think is just bizarre to even think in 2020 we're still having to deal with. So a lot of companies can't actually report on that information. We still have very low kind of rates in terms of colleagues or individuals indicating maybe how they identify themselves because of fear of how they might be discriminated. So there are a lot of issues from a data standpoint. So it's not to trivialize the importance of it, but I guess it just goes to show that the data can't always tell a story. So it's important to think about what your culture is telling you. Speaking to colleagues, and that's why these forums are important. It's a safe place for colleagues to feel like they can share their feedback. Look at your employee opinion survey results, right? And then the data should only be either a confirmation or just really showing you your blind spots, but it shouldn't be the be all and end all.
it's quite clear that you're so passionate about what you're doing and what you're delivering. And you know, as you said at the very beginning, passion around this diversity inclusion is so important if you want to follow a career in that. But obviously, you're very passionate about what you're doing within Barclays as well, within the for the business. What is it that drives you? What is it that keeps you thinking of new ways of doing things?
Yeah, so I mean, I talked earlier about my background. So I'm mixed race. So when I'm in Ghana, which is where I'm from, I'm considered a white person. And when I'm in England, I'm considered a black person.
Yeah.
And I'm a mum of two. I've got two toddlers. So being a mother, I'm a Christian. I feel like within myself, I've always, from a very young age, walked into a room thinking about whether or not I fit in. And I think it took me a very long time to realize that that doesn't have to be a question. I think being able to go into a place and feel like you can be whoever you want to be, and that's okay, is how everyone should feel. And as much as it's important to have that within yourself, you also don't want to be in spaces where you feel rejected or you don't feel like you belong because someone has decided that they don't feel comfortable with you being there. And I think that's it for me. I don't want anybody to ever feel like that going into work or in their own social circles. And I've always done quite a lot of work around diversity and inclusion. So doing a lot around young people, organizing events for young Black people to help create more kind of opportunities to improve social mobility. I've recently been doing some work with mums in business, because once again, you know, a lot of women are being disadvantaged by having children, which is, you know, it shouldn't be the case. It's such a blessing to bring a child into this world, and you shouldn't feel like your career should be compromised or your business because of it. So I'm very passionate about it, and I think everyone should have equal opportunities to succeed, and it's important that we all take accountability for breaking down barriers for another person. And that's why I love doing D&I, because it just allows me to do that at a bigger scale than my own individual influence. So
well, it sounds like you're doing a lot individually as well as for the organisation, which is just brilliant. And I think I remember when we've spoken in the past, you talked about the ability that you have. You're creating an ability to make a space for someone so they never feel uncomfortable. And I just love that comment, and I think that's a really lovely way to finish off this conversation. I know you're always so very open in supporting and helping people should they need it. So you're happy for me to sort of tag you into this and let people know that you're around should they want to pick up the phone or have a further conversation.
Absolutely. I'm on LinkedIn. I love posting on there. So please do reach out and connect with me on LinkedIn. And I'd love to also be part of any other D&I conversations or equally about any of the topics I've discussed. I'm hugely passionate. So please do reach out and get in touch.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for your time today. I look forward to sharing this, and I look forward to speaking to you very soon. Thank you.